Chapter 4. The girl stands close and leans against me. There was another girl once, not so kind as this one. This one knows when to be quiet, and her hair smells like the woods. I am always glad to hear her footsteps. I loved having time to myself when either Bevan or Garak was milking. It lasted only until my mother noticed me idling, of course. That morning we dug a pit for a cauldron fire. We boiled tallow for candles, another terrible, smelly job, but thankfully it lasted only a few days. I was grateful when lambing slowed and Phelan decided to help her cousins break flax. It had been buried beneath the dark surface of the wet soil in boggy Korak, then had been 20 days soaking in the creek, weighed down by stones. Now the stems were rotten and ready to peel. The fibers inside the thick flax stems spin, the same as wool, but are lighter and stronger. Since the creek was on the far side of our Toos land, Fallon decided to sleep there rather than walk home weary each night. That evening my mother told me Fallon would be gone from us for 10 additional glorious days or more. I tried hard not to smile. She tried hard not to notice me trying hard. My mother is unfallingly kind, but I knew that Fallon's presence in our house was hard for her much of the time. That evening and those that followed were peaceful. With my father off to war and Fallon breaking flax, it was just the two of us making our barley suppers, sometimes eating a bit of old, hard cheese my mother had tucked away and saved for a time like this one. I love sitting with her on the wide oaken bench that stands in our yard just past the herb garden, talking in the dark. "You have become a fine cheesemaker," my mother said to me one evening. I felt my cheeks go pink. She loves me with all her heart, I know that, but she is not one for praise. So when it comes, I blush. "I'm getting better, I know," I said modestly. "I'm sure this year you will make cheese as good as any of the grown women of the tooth," she said. I managed a long breath. "Thank you for saying so, Mother," I answered. She looked at me. I could see the shine of her white skin in the moonlight. "You do all work well. Last year, when you helped me birth calves and foals, you had as steady a hand as any." I smiled. "I love the horses, Mother." She nodded. "I know you do, and it is a pity you are not a boy." I sat up straighter, looking into her eyes. I love foals' breath sweet with milk. I love their hoofs, small enough to fit in my cupped hand. I don't love weaving or embroidery or dyeing. Mother nodded, but she refused to discuss the impossible again. She had told me a dozen times horses were for men, for war, for hunting and plowing, and riding off to deliver tribute and visit lords. The only reason my mother helped mares and cows having trouble birthing was that the men wanted nothing to do with it. I had helped her a dozen times when a foal or calf was in a wrong position and needed turning or straightening to come into the world. It was like a miracle every time. I loved to smell the odd salt, sweet scent of mare's breath when they were close to birthing. My mother said she could not smell it, but I could, and I loved to see the foals take their first breath. "I want to teach you the rest of the dye plants this year before you and the girls go to the high pastures," she said. I knew my mother wanted me to learn all I could, but her mentioning the high pastures made my stomach tighten. Bevan and Garrick and I were all excited and a little nervous about going for the first time that year. I was hoping that my mother could come with us, if my father would allow her. "You will be grown and gone before I can believe that it has happened," she said. She went silent then, and I waited. My mother can take a good long time to speak her mind, but when she does, she says precisely what she means. I am like my father. I open my lips, and words tumble out, wrong or right. "I've been meaning to ask if there is a boy that you fancy," my mother said slowly. I shook my head so hard my hair slapped my cheeks. "No, not a one." She laughed. "I was like you are, Laura. There is no need to hurry it, to my mind anyway. It'll come quick enough. I'll tell your father and do my best, but—" Her voice faded and stopped, and I knew what she was thinking. Fallon had not wanted to choose a boy, and look what had happened to her. None had ever chosen her. She was nearly 15 now, so cross and angry that none of the boys her own age wanted a thing to do with her. The older men and the widowers stepped around her even more warily. If she was not promised by now, there was a chance she never would be. Bevan's eldest sister was an old woman of 30 now, and she had never been married a day. She lived with one of Bevan's brothers and his wife. If a woman didn't marry, she never had her own house, never her own life. "I just don't want to be shoved along," I said quietly. My mother took in a long breath. "I will do what I can to keep your father out of it." "Thank you, Mother," I said, and I meant it. Standing up to my father was no task for a coward, and he would want me married sooner than later. "He should be home soon," my mother said quietly. "Did he say when?" I asked, knowing my father rarely told her any more. He was tired of breaking his own promises. My mother was nodding. He did, and he said he would try to be back before summer start, before Beltane. Try, I asked. Try or would? My mother frowned deeper. Try, but I think he will. He knows that we will need all the men here by then, to plow and plant. Though I am glad your brothers are not here, she added, without saying anything more. I knew what she meant. Fergal and Tyrion were farther west a good deal, close to the sea and away from Anthony's Norman lords. Unless things got worse, they would be clear of most of the fighting. It all seemed so senseless to me. The Irish clans fought one another, they all fought the Normans, and no one ever managed to have a year without sorrows in their tooth. Men who lost their lives in the fighting, or women starving at home, waiting for men who never returned. So it should be very soon, my mother said. I smiled vacantly, not wishing to remind her that he had said the same thing the year before, that had not come home until nearly a fortnight after summer had begun. I wondered if we women and girls would be plowing again this year.